Hello everyone and welcome back. In the previous video I painted and camouflaged the Kettenkrad. I also applied chipping, fading, and some filters. In today's video I'll continue weathering the vehicle and I'll show you some of the techniques I used to achieve the final look. Okay, let's roll. The first step used was to add some texture to the lower parts of the vehicle and trailer. And this dry earth splashes was perfect for the task. This is a really easy product to use, straight out of the bottle and onto the model. And it also has a nice in-scale dirt look to it. I wasn't going for a thick mud effect on this particular vehicle. I was looking to get an overall dusty effect with some dry mud encrusted on the lower portions of it. And I think this first step turned out rather well. I wanted some of the dusty areas to have a worn look to them, and to do this I used a moistened Q-tip and dabbed out certain areas that I thought were too heavy. Dust accumulates in cracks and crevices, and that's mainly where I was trying to concentrate most of that look. An old tattered brush was used to do a little more fine blending work, with just a hint of odorless thinner on it. Don't be afraid to get those fingers in there as well. No one ever said you couldn't. And here the removal process continues. I'm trying to push the dust into the cracks and crevices as much as possible. Here I'm using vertical streaking to create dusty rain marks. This is a very back and forth technique, adding and reducing the effect with each layer. And here you can see the results after a couple hours of work. Here I'm going to try and replicate what you saw on the other side of the vehicle. Again, it's all about adding and subtracting. Put the product on, remove the product, add a little more, do a little more removal, until I achieve the proper look. It's by no means an easy and quick method, but for authenticity, it's worth the extra effort, and I think you'll be happy with the final outcome. I know I certainly have. I go pretty heavy on everything below the fender area with this technique. I'm really looking for that dry, dusty appearance. Of course, some of that dust will make it onto the upper surfaces of the vehicle, but for now, I'll just deal with the lower portions and we'll get to that later on in the video. If you're looking for more videos on weathering dry, dusty vehicles, I'll post a link in the upper right-hand corner and down below in the description. Consider checking those videos out after this one is done. Here I'm adding a slightly darker brown filter. This will help push back some of those lighter dusty areas a little bit. Here I've added a gloss varnish to the oil paint. This will help achieve that slightly glossy look you see around oil deposits when they've dried out. The dry earth effect I added earlier helps make these oil deposits look a little more authentic by absorbing some of the oil to give that dry, wet effect. And again, these oily areas were built up with multiple layers using various browns and oranges, just like you'd see on the real vehicle. Reference and observation go a long way when creating these type of effects. Various shades of brown oil paints were used to create a speckling effect. I used this to simulate various oil, grease, and dirt deposits. Vertical surfaces on vehicles can also show a lot of wear and tear. Here I'm using buff and yellow ochre to fade the top paint surface and create a dusty appearance as well. I'm also trying to keep things as random as possible. By keeping things random, you'll make your vehicle look more interesting and unique. Real-life weathering is never uniform. Here I'm using an enamel product to create some more speckling effects. Oils tend to have more of a subtle effect. Enamels tend to be a little more bold in their appearance. More staining with oils. Here you can see a nice combination of streaking, staining, and chipping. Streaking can be achieved by feathering out both sides of the paint line. I continue this until I achieve the right look. Here I continue to emphasize the look of dirt and oil deposits. I like to vary these rain streaks and oil streaks with lighter and darker shades of paint. I try to create these streaks in groups of 2s and 3s with a variety of longer and shorter strokes. Then once I'm happy with everything, I'll go back in and do some blending. I really try to keep things random and unpredictable as possible. Most people have a love-hate relationship with pigments. I'm sort of in the middle with them. I like to use them. They can be a little messy, but I find I can get some really cool effects with pigments. I really like to use a variety of products when I'm weathering. I find that's really where I get my variation from and the authentic look of a weathered vehicle. I use pigments in a couple different ways. I like to add them to a paint and create a slurry, or I'll add them dry to the top of a vehicle and kind of grind them into the paint. By adding pigment to the paint, I find that helps bind things a little better and you don't get as much removal of the pigment itself. It also reacts as real dust would in real life by kind of absorbing some of the paint and the washes and different colors you put on top, which can create some rather realistic and striking effects. Here I'm adding some of that paint pigment mix to the lower sections of the vehicle, just trying to create another layer of dust over top of what I've put on there already. Once dry, you can see here that it's more of a dusty paint which I can easily blend into the painted surface. This also grips the surface much better than as if you were to just put straight pigment on. I then add this to the entire upper surfaces of the vehicle. You can also see that I'm being quite aggressive with the application. This also helps bond the material to the surface. Next, I add some enamel rust washes. This also helps add another layer of interest to all the areas. There are also certain areas that can benefit from some false shadows, or using the technical name, ambient occlusion. These areas can then be blended in with a dry blending brush. I also like to add darker streaking around areas like filler fuel caps and engine compartments. These areas often show fuel spills or oil leaks in various sizes and intensities. Then everything is blended in with a soft brush. At this stage, I am constantly going between lighter and darker shades, pitting light against dark for maximum effect. As you can see, these panels have many layers with different effects on them, and this is what creates that interest and makes your model stand out and look unique, in my opinion. This is one area that I really thought a lot about. I was trying to find a way to make it look like the seat was very dusty, yet had areas that were wiped clean from troops or equipment. I decided to go with a buff and white oil paint mixture and just lay it into the areas that kind of would collect the dust, and then go back in with a moistened paintbrush and remove and blend some of those areas. And then when I was satisfied with the look, I went in and blended everything with a dry soft brush. The process was then repeated with a more opaque mixture, the whole time keeping a very random and choppy motion with the brush. So far, so good. Next, I removed some of the center sections with odorless thinner. Then the edges were blended back in. The next step was to punch out the instrument dials, using my ancient yet trusty Hysterex punch and die set. It's as simple as 1, 2, 3.
Wow!
I find punching out any kind of round dials or round decals makes a world of difference when it goes to applying them to the model. You really eliminate a lot of that carrier film and I find they fit just a little better than by not doing it. The next step was to set the decals in place with some micro set and micro sol. As you can see, the decals fit perfectly. Decals, decals, potatoes, potatoes, tomatoes, tomatoes.
Why can't we all just get along?
And a little microsol to snuggle those decals down. And as a final touch, some future floor polish to give a glass-like finish to the dials. Clear colors were used to pick out various lights and reflectors. The same mix of paint and pigment was used as the first layer on the trailer tarp. Several colors were used and blended in to give this tarp its dusty effect. I also ground in some dry pigment to add a little more texture to the surface. This is a little unconventional and probably not something many of you have used for modeling. That's right, real used motor oil. As you can see, the results speak for themselves. I did a few tests beforehand just to see if this would work, and it did. It worked great. The oils mixed perfectly with the oil paints and left a very realistic looking oil stain on the surface. I also believe that having the dried pigments on the surface really helps to absorb the oil and give that realistic sheen without being too glossy or over the top. Some spattering was also used on the tarp to give it that oily, greasy feel. And I think I'm pretty happy with the results here. All the worn areas on the running gear were given a coat of Vallejo oily steel. I think it gives a nice bare metallic feel and doesn't look like you painted it with silver paint. One of the last things I like to do is use a pencil lead to rub along certain areas of the model. I feel this gives a nice metal look to areas where the paint has been worn off and metal is exposed without using a silver paint. It looks a little more realistic in my opinion. Tracks are one of the best areas to use this technique, and is one of the best ways I know of to create a polished steel look. Another very useful weathering tool are watercolor pencils. I've been using them for a few years now, and they really come in handy for doing certain effects, such as oil staining or just discoloration to different areas of the model. They're very easy to use. You just put them on and use a little water to move them around. And if you don't like an area, it's easy enough just to go back in with a little more water and you can remove it completely. And you can layer these on top of each other, different colors, blending them all together. They're super versatile. As I've said before, and I'll always say it again, it's all about the layers, it's all about blending and creating effects on top of effects. That's how you get something that will look more realistic and pleasing to the eye. I wasn't totally happy with the final effect of the seat, so I decided to use a dark pencil here and just add a little more texture to the seat and blend those colors in a little more. I think by using the watercolor pencil here, it captured more of what I was going for. It really helped to give the illusion of a worn surface. Well, friends, I really appreciate you hanging out to the end of the video. I had a lot to share, and I hope you found it useful or at least entertaining. And as always, please consider subscribing to my channel, hit the bell notification. But really the most important thing you can do for me is like this video. This really helps me because YouTube will recommend this video to others just like you. Well, that does it for this video. I hope you enjoy the gallery images here at the end. Stay tuned for the next part where I'll be painting the figures that will go with this vehicle. Take care, everyone. Build more models, and most importantly, keep those brushes wet.